Be thou my vision, O Lord of my heart. Not be all else to me, save that thou art. Thou my best thought by day or by night. Waking or sleeping, thy presence my light. Be thou my wisdom, and thou my true word. I ever with thee, and thou with me, Lord. Thou and thou only, first in my heart. Great God of heaven, my treasure thou art. High King of heaven, my victory won. May I reach heaven's joys, O bright heaven's sun. Heart of my own heart, whatever befall, still be my vision, O ruler of all. Be thou my vision, Lord of my heart. Not be all else to me, save that thou art. Thou my best thought by day or by night. Waking or sleeping, thy presence my light.
Jesus himself stood among them and said to them, "Peace be with you." They were startled and terrified and thought that they were seeing a ghost. He said to them, "Why are you frightened? And why do doubts arise in your hearts? Look at my hands and my feet. See that it is I myself. Touch me and see, for a ghost does not have flesh and bones as you see that I have." And when he had said this, he showed them his hands and his feet. While in their joy they were disbelieving and still wondering, he said to them, "Have you anything here to eat?" They gave him a piece of broiled fish, and he took it and ate it in their presence. Then he said to them, "These are my words that I spoke to you while I was still with you, that everything written about me in the law of Moses, the prophets, and the Psalms must be fulfilled." Then he opened their minds to understand the scriptures, and he said to them, "Thus it is written that the Messiah is to suffer and to rise from the dead on the third day, and that repentance and forgiveness of sins is to be proclaimed in his name to all nations, beginning from Jerusalem. You are witnesses of these things, and see, I am sending upon you what my Father promised. So stay here in the city until you have been clothed with power from on high."
Just prior to the reading that we have for today, we hear about a couple of disciples who were traveling on the road going to Emmaus. They encountered a stranger and began to talk about all of the things that had happened in Jerusalem. And the stranger seemed to be unaware of any of it, didn't let on that there was any knowledge of the suffering, death, and the reported resurrection of Jesus. And so they began to talk about that further. And as they went along, the stranger began to talk to them about the scriptures and the deeper meanings of all of that. And they came to the place where they were going to stop for the evening, and the stranger acted as though he was going to go on. But because they wanted to be hospitable, they invited the stranger in to provide lodging, to provide rest and food and water. And so as they sat at the table and shared further, there was a moment where the bread was broken and the stranger gave it to the disciples. And it was in that moment that they recognized that this was the presence of Christ in their midst. They didn't understand how it happened, but they recognized in that act of hospitality that this was the risen Christ. And it changed everything for them. It opened their eyes and their hearts and spoke peace into the midst of all that had been going on. So later, we catch up with the other disciples. And there they are gathered, and these other two that had been on the road to Emmaus began explaining all of this to the gathered disciples. And they're trying to figure all of this out when all of a sudden there's this person standing in their midst. They don't know how he got in there, but they recognized him as Jesus. And he said, "Peace be with you." And he began to show his body, showing that it is indeed real flesh in their midst. Not just a ghost, not an angel, not some kind of heavenly messenger that's come. And in fact, to help prove that he has a body, he ate some broiled fish. Now, in Hebrew tradition, they didn't believe that divine beings ate at all. And so this was a way of proving that this is in fact a real body. And then Jesus begins to unfold the scriptures for all of them gathered there, much like what happened along the road to Emmaus. And it opened up the disciples in ways that we can only imagine. I would have loved to have been a fly on the wall to see what would have happened in a situation like that. And then Jesus said that now, because of all that they had seen and heard and experienced, they were supposed to be now witnesses, to go beginning at their home base there and spreading to all of the world to share what it is to be a person who follows the way of Christ. Now, when we think of witnesses, we think of the trials that we see on television and people taking the stand and making an oath and telling the story of what they've seen and heard. But what we see the disciples do is follow the example of Christ, and that's the practice of hospitality. It's feeding the hungry, it's caring for the sick, visiting those who are in prison, proclaiming good news to those who are downtrodden, to run to the edges, to the margins of life, where the people who are ignored need to hear that message of hope, that message of peace that Jesus speaks into the confusion and trauma of all of our lives. So this kind of witness that Jesus is calling them to be about is not just about words. It's not just about telling the story, but it's about a lived life that in many ways helps to pull the veil away from the eyes of people so that they know that the presence of a living Christ is in their midst. Hospitality, inclusion, love, those are all very powerful things. And those are the very ways in which Christ lived his life when he was walking around in sandals on the earth. And those are the very things that we are called to be about as followers of that way. To be about the work of inclusion, of meeting people at their needs and speaking peace into trauma. To be there with and for one another. And in doing that, in sharing that kind of experience, it's like the disciples there in the house in Emmaus, where Jesus was known in the breaking of the bread. And for us, Christ is known in the sharing of our hearts. This is the kind of Easter faith that the church is called to be about. Now we see a whole lot of a different kind of witness from the church in so many ways, of exclusion, of judgment, of closed-mindedness, of even violence in some cases against our siblings. Our challenge is to live into this call of Jesus, who is a risen presence among us, speaking peace into our own experience, to those things that we've seen and heard, so that we can then proclaim that experience to the world and speak peace to them as well. May it be so.
I'm no longer my own but yours. I'm no longer my own but yours. I can rest in your love, your promise endures. I'm no longer my own but yours. Put me to what you will. Rank me with whom you will. Blessing or suffering, in every season I sing. I'm no longer my own but yours. I'm no longer my own but yours. I can rest in your love, your promise endures. I'm no longer my own but yours. I'll be employed by you, or laid aside for you, exalted or brought low. In your hand I can't let go. I'm no longer my own but yours. I'm no longer my own but yours. I can rest in your love, your promise endures. I'm no longer my own but yours. Let me be filled by you. I'll empty me out for you. All things or nothing more. You are the one I adore. I'm no longer my own but yours. I'm no longer my own but yours. I can rest in your love, your promise endures. I'm no longer my own but yours.
When everything good begins to feel out of reach, when collective change seems impossible, or hope is simply hard to find, Christ whispers, "Peace, peace among us." Not to dull our need to feel sorrow, or to quell necessary conflict, but to remind us again of what's so easily forgotten. Evil has not overtaken us. Love is still alive. God is potential, always with us. With this peace that sustains, go with confidence.
Go forth in goodness, for in Christ is good.